Be careful what you pray for. Be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it. This week, in our pastor's Bible study that's met monthly throughout the summer, we looked at various translations of the Lord's Prayer. And part of our conversation revolved around the difference between saying the Lord's Prayer and praying the Lord's Prayer. Saying the Lord's Prayer and praying the Lord's Prayer. Often, with the Lord's Prayer, the words just sort of roll right off our lips. We don't really think about what we are praying. Or we don't think about the implications of what we are praying for, or the process that might be involved if the things that we prayed for actually came to fruition. The Lord's Prayer is an incredibly powerful prayer, and it has some dangerous and some subversive statements in it, not the least of which is, "Your kingdom come on earth." Your kingdom come. What seems like a fairly pleasant or general plea to God is actually a subversive or countercultural or revolutionary request, because it's a plea for the existing social order to be turned on its head and for the world to be governed and controlled by a new set of ethics or a new set of rules. It's a call for our social and our political interactions to be transformed. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Be careful what you pray for. Part of the problem is that we have created Jesus in our own image. We think of Jesus as meek and mild, gently strolling along the streets of the Israeli country, along the Israeli countryside, taking in or talking about these happy metaphors about sheep and lights on a hill, or performing these great miracles to all of his admiring fans. We might find it uncomfortable to think about him as a social revolutionary who was dedicated to denouncing the oppressive Jewish systems and challenging the pseudo-authority of the occupying Roman army. We don't like to think about Jesus like that. But that's the Jesus of Nazareth, the liberator speaking out against the forces of injustice. That might be an uncomfortable image for some, but it is historical truth. Your kingdom come. Be careful what you pray for. In our gospel reading today, Jesus gives a number of parables, each one beginning with the phrase, "The kingdom of heaven is like." And we might hear that phrase, we might lean back in our pews or our chairs, settle back in, get a little comfortable, because we know that what we're about to hear is Jesus spin this pretty little story for us, right? But Jesus doesn't work like that. When Jesus, the revolutionary, not gentle Jesus, when Jesus, the revolutionary, says the kingdom of heaven is like, We should have shivers go up our spines. We should be sitting on the edge of our seats because Jesus has dedicated his life and his death to taking us out of our comfort zones and confronting us with the harsh reality of the truth. We've been listening to a variety of parables in chapter 13, but he begins this section, verse 31, with the parable of the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Oh, we find that comforting, don't we? Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, telling us that big things can come from small beginnings. We link it to Jesus saying that if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, well then everything's going to be okay. We think that it's okay to have just a little bit of faith because that will be enough. We can all relax. We don't need to work particularly hard at being a Christian. We don't need to devote too much of our time or even our whole selves to the spiritual disciplines because gentle Jesus has told us that a little bit of faith is perfectly adequate. But gentle Jesus didn't tell this parable. This parable was told by revolutionary Jesus, who was prepared to live and to die to see a new world order come into being. What would Jesus' original audience have heard when he told them this parable? They would have heard a story about a mustard plant, an invasive plant that went deep down into the soil. They would have picked up a real threat in this story because the sower plants the seed, perhaps in desperation out of his own poverty, hoping that he might produce something very quickly. But there's also the danger that the mustard plant would grow and grow and grow and grow and invade the rest of the soil and take over that part of the landscape, making the soil unusable for any other vegetation. And of course, that invasive property is exactly what Jesus wants to highlight, because his mustard seed becomes a tree that birds can come and nest in. The kingdom of God for revolutionary Jesus is completely invasive. It might look small. It might even look like it is sown in desperation and out of poverty, but it will grow and it will grow and it will grow and it will invade the land and eventually become a sanctuary for others to find rest in. The kingdom of God comes as a threat to those who cling to the old world order. Jesus of Nazareth wants God's kingdom to come and to invade and to dominate the land, and that is the message that he is prepared to live and to die for. And if we have not yet gotten the point about the kingdom of God being threatening or uncontrollable or invasive, revolutionary Jesus follows it up with yet another parable. This little story in verse 33, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Ah, now we get it. That must be like the spring baking championship on the Food Network, right? Now we know that gentle Jesus, now we know what he's talking about. Maybe we picture some woman in her kitchen kneading the dough while her children are playing all around her, and we have this smell of freshly baking bread in the kitchen, and perhaps even the kitchen door is open where her husband is sitting lovingly outside reading the newspaper with the dog at his feet. An idyllic family scene, a comfortable image for us from gentle Jesus. But gentle Jesus didn't tell this parable. This parable was told by revolutionary Jesus, who was prepared to live and to die so that he could see a new world order come into being. So what did that yeast mean for the first hearers of this parable? Well, of course, yeast was to be avoided at all of the holy times of the year. Unleavened bread was the order of the day. And elsewhere, Jesus used the symbol of yeast to describe this subversive or insidious behavior of the Pharisees. For those who lived in this agricultural or even a nomadic culture, yeast was pretty hard to handle. It was unpredictable. It bubbled up, it oozed, it collapsed, it grew again. It was hard to handle in that culture, and at certain times it was just to be avoided altogether. So again, Jesus is not giving us a neat and comfortable image here. The kingdom of heaven is unpredictable. It bubbles up from within and it completely transforms the environment in which it grows. Mustard seeds and yeast, these are uncomfortable products. They're subversive. They can't be controlled. They can't be contained. They grow in secret, and then all of a sudden, the host environment becomes transformed. And the effects of the seed and the yeast are that it will do what it wants to do. The sower and the baker cannot control them. The kingdom of heaven is subversive, and we can't control it. This is an important lesson for us to learn here at Lakewood United Methodist Church. As we focus on our mission, as we want to reach out into the community, we can't focus on activities that are comfortable for us. We must be willing to take part in subversive things, a socially challenging agenda, getting out there to vote, standing against racism, working to change policies and systems that are inherently racist, embracing all people, no matter their identity or who they love. The kingdom of heaven is like your kingdom come on earth. Be careful what you pray for. In addition to being subversive, we have to realize that the kingdom of heaven is messy too. Revolutionary Jesus and this pastor might be stepping on some toes right now, but there's a tendency for us to want this church to just be a beautiful place where we come and we sing beautiful hymns in the comfort of this beautiful building. And I'm not saying that those things are not important. But if we are to grow as a church, we may need to forsake aspects of beauty for the sake of the kingdom of God. Let me say that again. We may need to forsake aspects of beauty for the sake of the kingdom of God. Woo, all right, so remind me that they're back here. Thank you. The truth is that the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is not always particularly beautiful. It's not always a particularly beautiful place to be. The kingdom of heaven can be a messy place. Sometimes it could even be an ugly place. If we think that gentle Jesus is telling these parables, we might expect the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God on earth, as it is in heaven, to be beautiful and peaceful. But gentle Jesus didn't tell these parables. This next parable was also told by revolutionary Jesus, who was prepared to live and die to see a new world order come into being. In verse 47, he prepares us for a kingdom that can be messy and ugly, even as it is beautiful. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore and sat down and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. When the fishermen cast their nets into the Sea of Galilee, they primarily wanted to catch 3 types of fish. They wanted to catch sardines, they wanted to collect, as I said, sardines, barbels, and mushed. These fish, those 3 fish, were the staple diet of that time, and those fish would have been the most valuable for selling. But the truth is, when those nets were brought back to shore, they wouldn't have just been full of sardines or barbels or mushed. There were 23 species of fish in the Sea of Galilee at that time. And so, alongside the sardines and the barbels and the mushed, their nets would have been full of catfish and anchor, both which were considered unclean to Jewish people, and eels and shellfish and all sorts of others too. The trawl of that net would have brought together the clean and the unclean, the good and the bad. And the task of the fishermen was to separate them, to ready them for market. Fishing was a messy business. The work of God's kingdom is messy. As we live in mission with one another here in this church, and as we live in mission with our whole community here in Lakewood, it will be messy. Extravagant welcome and hospitality, opening the doors, going out of the doors. It's going to be messy as we navigate relationships with people who don't think like us, or who don't dress like us, or who don't talk like us, or any number of other things. But in the messy, beauty can be found. Because as Jesus told in this parable in verse 45, it takes a lot of searching to find a pearl. But once it is found, the search will have been worth it. Your kingdom come on earth. Be careful what you pray for. Because the kingdom of heaven is like that thing that's proclaimed by revolutionary Jesus, not some imaginary gentle Jesus, meek and mild. The kingdom of heaven is as subversive as it is messy. And if we want to embrace the kingdom here at Lakewood United Methodist Church, we must embrace the revolutionary nature of the kingdom and the inevitable mess that it's going to cause. When revolutionary Jesus saw social injustice and oppression and marginalization, he spoke out against it. We need to speak out against those things. Jesus' ministry was a subversive ministry. His was a messy ministry. Revolutionary Jesus was prepared to die for the liberation of his people because he knew that the coming kingdom of heaven, the coming kingdom of God, was the ultimate goal of liberation. That was the mission of Jesus of Nazareth. And we, as a church, are invited into that mission today, it will be uncomfortable. I guarantee it. It will be messy. But that's the kingdom of heaven for you. So, as we come to prayer time today, are you ready to truly and earnestly pray, "Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven"? Be careful what you pray for.